Hi there, I'm Franksy and welcome to my channel. So I thought I'd just do all my lists for lockdown. So from March to the end of December 2021, this is my range of lockdown games. So this is going to be my top 10 lockdown time spent games. And that is just the top 10 games I've just spent the longest amount of time playing. So I use the board game stats app, which is really quite cool and handy. It does loads of stuff. I've got it with the deep insights, so I can look into things like who's got the best role in the game and so on. But the main bit is, when I start a play, I've just got the play timer on there. When I finish, I press stop, and it'll time exactly how long it takes to play a game. But anyway, enough of that. Let's move on to the games. So the honourable mention here, which has had one play for 3 hours and 4 minutes, is Food Chain Magnate.
So this is my honourable mention because it took just one play to almost make it on the list. And I thought that was quite an impressive feat, although that was repeated by one or two other games. I would describe Food Chain Magnate as an economic strategy game. It's got a fairly heavy rule set, and so that can increase the learning time and the thinking time for the first couple of rounds just to get your head around it. The gameplay is split into two halves each round. The first half you spend assigning your staff that you're going to use for that round, and the second half is when you do all your actions, mostly using the staff that you assign for the round. The first half of each round can be done simultaneously with everyone deciding who they want, but at the end of this, turn order is decided by the number of staff each player has used and how many spots they've got available and so on. So the thinking time in this first bit can be increased if you're trying to work out who you want to go before, who you want to go after, and so on. Another thing about the game is there can be variable lengths as well. So at the start of the game, each player decides how much money they want to be in the reserve. It can be 100, 200 or 300. So you can have longer games or less long games depending on how much money everyone wants. Although for our game, it was the first game for most people, so it was just standard 200 we put in. And the game, I should probably mention as well, it was 4 players, but 3 were new, which probably also accounted for why the play length went this time for the average amount of money. I think perhaps if we played again with the same players, or perhaps with other people who played the game before, maybe it might not take as long to play. I can't say it for certain, because we might all choose to play the higher reserve that game, although it kind of ramps up, so a higher reserve is probably only a difference of 1 round maybe, depending on how everyone's engine is going. Also, maybe we play with 5 players. How would that affect it? Would that make it longer? Definitely would make it longer, but how much? Or there's a catch-up expansion as well. Whether or not that would actually make it longer or shorter, or just stay the same, I'm unsure. I haven't looked into the expansion too much.
Number 10, game of the previous list, The Mind.
So the first on this list is the last on the last list. The Mind at times can be a game full of really short rounds, if everyone's got low cards and they just want to play it as fast as they can. But you also get some longer rounds if everyone's holding high 80s and 90s and wants to hold on to them as long as they can. The game length as well will really vary. If you get right up to say round 8 and you're playing quite well and quite in tune, it might take quite a while. Whereas you could have some other games where in about 5 to 10 minutes it's over because you've got to the third round and everyone's just making mistakes or not paying attention. But the main reason this made the list is just the large amount of plays it received. It's a common element in a couple of games in the list, but it took 20 plays and it's at 3.5 hours. So that's way more plays than a lot of these games actually had. So the only reason it's here is just the sheer volume.
Number 9, with 3 hours and 44 minutes over 5 plays, is Horrified.
This next game on the list is another cooperative game like the previous. For those who haven't played it or don't know much about it, it plays similar to a Pandemic style of gameplay. I'm assuming you've played Pandemic. If you've not, then maybe that's something else I have to explain. Basically, just every turn, the player's going to move their character around locations on the board and perform their actions for the turn. Then after they've done that, a monster card is going to be drawn, which is going to cause some of the monsters on the board to move and attack. In this version, each enemy is based off a classic universal monster, and unlike Pandemic, or at least the base game anyway, each monster in this has different objectives and different means to beat them. It's not just not just generic monsters do whatever you can. It's quite thematic. So if you want to do Dracula, you've got to stake him. If you want to beat Frankenstein's monster, you've got to make him meet the bride and so on. One thing about the game is that you can set up multiple amounts of monsters in a single game to bring up the difficulty. Doing this will normally increase the time taken to play. And usually when I've played it, we've tried to include kind of the most you can from the player count to make it a challenge without making it impossible. So my games of this have gone a bit longer than if it was just multiple players against one monster. It still only takes around 45 minutes a game, so it is a good short length game that's easy to get into. And there is a kind of sequel, but not a standalone, just American Monsters version, which has come out as well. So I might check that out, but I feel like it'll be pretty similar, just a different batch of monsters and a different sort of objectives and ways to defeat them and so on.
So the number 8 game is Harry Potter's Death Eating Rising.
So again, we've got another cooperative game on the list. I promise they're not all co-ops, it just happens to be a theme at the minute. I think it might be due to the fact that when you're in competitive games, if you mess up, that's it, it's just you. But in co-op games, if you mess up, you're actually affecting everyone because you're all on the same team. So maybe we spent a bit more time thinking about our moves in here than just playing our pieces willy-nilly like we might do in some other stuff if we're unsure what to do. So Death Eating Rising takes the original Rising game, Thanos Rising, and adds a few small changes here and there for the Harry Potter version, so it's not just a complete reskin. There's only going to be 3 groups you draft your witches and wizards from rather than 4, and unlike before you just had to defeat a certain amount of villains, here you've got to do that, but also wait for Voldemort to appear and then take him out as well. The game works, everyone's just going to collect a team of witches and wizards. They all provide either powers you can use for dice, other generic powers that don't cost dice, or they'll give you extra dice to roll on top of your starting dice. Each turn you work out what dice to roll and how many of each dice. You're going to assign them to the cards on the board, or to your characters that need them, or to your actual board. When you're done assigning, you can keep re-rolling and keep assigning. If you don't assign any dice in a round, then you've got to take one away. So you just keep going until you run out of dice to roll and play, basically. If you played enough dice on your allies on the main board, you can recruit them. If you played enough dice on enemies, you can damage them. If you played enough dice on any effects on your tableau anywhere, you get to do that. And then player's going to move to the next player, and then the enemies are going to get a chance to attack. And that's basically it. You just keep going until either Voldemort's shown up and you take him out, or until you've lost enough allies or completely lost one of your player teams. That's it. That's it to the game. So part of what takes some time in this game, I found, is sorting out the dice you're going to roll. Because for starters, you've got your starting basic dice, you've got 4 dice you're going to roll. Then you have to go through your characters and work out what extra dice you get. Some characters only get extra dice if there's another colour, so you've just got to check you've still got that specific colour, they've not lost any damage and been defeated on another player's turn. Some give you options of dice, so maybe you want to check what characters and what enemies are available before deciding what dice you're going to roll. And another bit that takes time as well is you can't roll more dice than what there are, so there's only a limited pool available. And the one downside of this means if everyone wants to roll the same colour, you're passing the same dice around the table. So you can't just kind of work out exactly what dice you want, put them in front of you and keep them there to your turn and roll them. Because you might not have enough purple dice to go around. So one of the players might go, oh, I need some purple, and pass it to them. When it gets back to you, you just got to remember how many purple you had and take them back, or you've got to calculate it all over again. Another actual main time factor as well is also with the change that Voldemort has to be defeated and you've got to wait for him to appear. So unlike in the original Marvel version, where if you started out with a lot of enemies off the bat, you could just start defeating them, and then you might get to the 8 enemies, 7 enemies, whatever difficulty you're playing, quite quickly. Whereas with the Harry Potter version, it doesn't matter how many Death Eaters or enemies you defeat, if Voldemort's not shown up, you can't attack him. If you can't attack Voldemort, you can't win the game because you need to defeat him. So normally these games last around about an hour, but the average time's evened out a little where there's been some difficult starting cards, so the games run out quite fast. So this had 5 plays like the previous co-op game, but this took 4.25 hours roughly to play. And that's why it's number 8 on the list.
At 7, there's only 2 plays, it's 4 hours and 25 minutes, it's The Gallerist.
So here we reach the first non-cooperative game on the list, and of course it's a nice heavy Virtual Asada game, so it took just 2 plays to get here. And I've got to say, these were 2 of the faster plays I've had. One of the games ended a lot sooner than it should have done, and the other one was a very easy teaching game and went through quite smoothly actually. So the Gallerist simulates players running art galleries, and mechanically it's just a worker placement game where there's only 4 spots on the board. Each spot though does have 2 actions you can choose from. And like many of the other Asada games I've played, you've got a variety of options on your turn, so obviously you've got all of this to choose from. And I do find it all links in together. So one of the spots you recruit artists, which kind of links into buying and selling art. But you've also got promoting an artist in the media, which links into recruiting artists, which also links into buying and selling art. But if you've already recruited someone and you've got a commission, you can't recruit someone else till you buy their commission, but you can't buy a commission until you actually go to free up some space, and it all just kind of ends up, you'll get some turns where you actually realise you can only do one option because you can't afford to do the other options, you don't have the workers to do it, and it kind of all just links in like that. One thing about this game as well is there's only 4 spots, but you can't block people off. If you want to go with someone else's, you just go there and you kick them out, which is all fine for you, but when a player gets kicked out, they get to do what's called an executive action, which is just a couple of small little actions they can take, like playing tickets or moving one of their workers to a spot on their tableau. But they can also pay points and then also use the action space again as they're getting kicked out. Now one thing this does mean is that if a player's gone around the board and he's left his little assistants anywhere, he could probably go 4 turns, maybe even 5 turns somehow in the same round. Which obviously this can add to the time spent playing the game, but also it's part of the fun and part of the charm in the game as well. It does mean though sometimes you can lose a turn order a little bit, and when someone's kicked you out and you take your turn, but then if it's the next player, perhaps it's the player after's turn, but you might think it's this player's turn because you'll get a little bit confused. That doesn't happen often though, to be honest. Most of the time spent though is looking at the board going, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. So my options are this, this, and this. Or spend this to do this. Or I want to go here, but then I get all these tokens. Now, then you've got a choice of which token you want to do. So, thankfully, the game does have a lot of time in between turns where you spend your time thinking about what you want to do next turn, because you have to literally weigh up your options. Because you can't ever be blocked off from options by other players. You can only be blocked off and stuff by yourself. And as I've said before, the game has multiple triggers. I didn't say it, but the game's got multiple triggers to signal the end of the game. So it can actually be ended sooner if any players rush when they think they're ahead. So there's 3 different aspects, and if 2 of the 3 are triggered, then the game over. So you could have a guy well in the lead who goes, right, that's it, I'm just going to focus on this now and do all of that, and then that's it, game over. Or someone might just unknowingly be working towards it because it's all part of the standard gameplay anyway, and they just really want it because it's how they're going to get their points. So just over 2 hours per game isn't half bad for the game experience you get out of this. I think the first game must have been at least 3 hours. But I'd happily play it again, and 2 hours per game, I don't find that too bad at all. And that's The Gallerist.
So number 6, Nemesis.
So at number 6, this was a game that could have placed much higher and should have placed much higher and probably will place much higher on different lists. I've had some individual plays alone that have been a couple of hours. This is here with 4 hours and 27 minutes across just 3 plays. Nemesis is a semi-cooperative survival game, and it feels mostly like the film Alien in board game format, with a couple of other sci-fi blockbusters taken for inspiration here and there. There's no official licenses, so they can't say it, but once you've played it or seen it, you're just going to think Alien. So the players are all crew members. They've all woken up on ship to find one of their own dead already. He may or may not have his chest burst open. It's never explicitly mentioned, but you never know. Each character's got different sets of skills and abilities and talents, and that's represented by their own deck of cards, which they'll use to play as the game goes on. And it's a little bit of a deck builder, but not. But your deck of cards is your actions, and some bad stuff will get shoved in there that will slow you down if you get hurt or anything like that. Each player's also got a pair of objectives taken from a common pool. One's personal objective, and one is corporate objective. And it starts off, you go out exploring the ship and just trying to work towards completing your objectives until you find what's known as an intruder. Once an intruder shows up, they just decide they're going to kill you all. And you all have to panic and decide what you're going to do, which is basically take 2 objectives, choose one to still secretly keep and discard the other. And this is where the semi-cooperative comes in. Because some of them, like corporate objectives, might be steal an alien egg and just escape in a pod. They just want you to get back to Earth with an egg, they don't care. But some of the personal objectives might be like, that captain over there, he's been annoying you all day, he's been annoying you all trip, you know what, just murder him. Just, while everyone's distracted, get over there, hammer in the back of the head, leave him for dead. No one knows you, it's fine. So everyone chooses if they want to do personal or corporate, keeps that, and then suddenly now you've just got to complete your objective and survive. And rounds play out each turn. Each player takes kind of up to 2 points of actions or passes. So you can take 2 actions on your turn, you can take 1 action and pass, or you can just pass. Once you pass, you're out. If we say the average action takes a minute, you've got 2 minutes per turn per player. Each player normally gets 3 turns per round if they use all the cards. So for a 4-player game, this can become 25 minutes a round. And the game has a maximum of 15 rounds. So that would work out 6 hours a game. So this is why I said earlier, it could have placed higher. Games don't last this long. The longest I had was 3.5 hours with 5 players. This is all going to be down to the many ways the game and everyone else will be trying to kill you. Intruders on the ship are big alien creatures. They can be hard to kill, and some of the big versions can kill off a character instantly if they're wounded enough. Dead characters mean less players to take turns. With the exception of, there is an extra rule where the first player to die can take over from the intruders. They discard all their player stuff and they take the intruder deck. And now the intruders aren't just computer AI driven by a deck of cards or what you draw out of a bag or anything. This player is physically playing the cards to try and get you. And I'm not going to lie, this is actually going to make the game go a lot faster. Any game I've played where players taking over intruders has made it insanely harder, and it's finished not long after. Player elimination is nobody's friend, so the second player who dies might be annoyed, but trust me, once this player's going, if he can't win, no one else can. It does not last long after that. And there's many ways for the game to just end abruptly as well. If there's too many fires on the ship, ship will explode. If there's too many mechanical failures on the ship, ship will explode. There was one game where I just wanted to get the ship to Mars. So I was the pilot, I went to the front of the ship, checked the coordinates, changed it, sent the ship to Mars, went, right guys, we're going to Earth. And literally just found the key for the escape pod, jumped in the escape pod and ran away. And that game took less than an hour because the next player had to kill the Queen and accidentally blew up the ship. One expansion that came with this from the Kickstarter was Aftermath, and that's basically where you keep the board as it is, and then you set up a follow-up on the same game, and an all-new crew explore, like arrive on the ship in their own little ship, and they get to explore it. I've only tried to play this once, and we were using one of the expansion races at the time, the Void Seekers, who also came in the box. So it didn't really work out, so we couldn't do it. But if we play with the Aftermath, that's going to add an extra hour onto gameplay as well. So that'll be even longer. So it might be tricky to get that out because a lot of people probably won't want to do that if they've just sat through a 2.5, 3 hour game sort of. But if I ever did manage to get that out and learn it and get a couple of plays in, then the average gameplay is going to increase significantly. And maybe if I did this list again, it would end up a solid number 1.
Number 5 game, another repeat from the last list, Decrypto.
So here we have another shorter game getting onto the list purely from the play quantities. Games of this can take a varying number of rounds, but generally it plays about 5 rounds and it plays about half an hour a game. Most playtime is simultaneous as teams design their codes, and you have got an hourglass included. So if one team is ready, you can stop the opponent's dilly-dallying and just turn it over and go, there you go, you've got a time limit to get your code out. I think it's optional, but I've tried to use it in every game, mainly because I'm not worried about the time and I love watching other people panic. So this was 4 hours, 38 minutes across 10 plays, Decrypto.
Number 4, again a game we talked about, Quarriors.
Another game I've talked about before, so I won't go too much into this one. But Quarriors is another nice, middling 45-minute game or so. And a lot of it doesn't even come from the gameplay. So you can get most of it can come from setting up, because you've got to decide what dice you're going to use. I randomly shuffle and deal out monsters and spells, but you then got to locate and find the correct dice and the correct card. And there's a bit of reading for the setup as well, because each dice has about 4 or 5 cards that can represent it, and each card is completely different for the powers and effects and what happens if you roll a star, because sometimes stuff doesn't have to roll a star. So you can't just memorize what each creature does, because it could be a different version. It could be a strong creature or a quick creature that you haven't got quick, but mighty is another one. And when you're playing the game as well, the first couple of rounds start off, everyone does the same sort of thing. As people buy dice, they get stronger, and you're normally finding it either ends quite fast and someone just gets straight there, or everyone gets a couple of big beasties out, and every turn, every creature's just getting destroyed and no one's managing to score glory. And then the winner just becomes the first player who can get someone to stay alive, whether by luck or playing spells to do so, or somehow using some strategy to do it. But you'll never really end in a stalemate, because there is also an alternate win condition where you buy up enough dice on the table, and if there's enough empty cards, the game just ends there and there. So it won't run on forever. I think 1 or 2 I have seen end with the alternate. But otherwise, 4 hours, 43 minutes for Quarriors.
Number 3, this is the highest game with 1 play. It's Star Trek Ascendancy.
So this is the game I could have hinted at a little bit earlier. And spoiler alert, but it's the last new game I've not talked about before. But this one play in particular, 5 hours and 31 minutes for the single play. It was a 4-player game, and we did use the Borg expansion, which did add an extra turn to go through every round. In my previous play of this, in fact the only previous play, when it first came out, that was 3 players. That took over 3 hours as well. So scaling up, this does seem about right, and not too much of an anomaly. I think there was still a bit of downtime around the turns, and a bit of thinking going on each turn for the players, which did add some extra time to the game, but I couldn't say quite how much. So in Ascendancy, each player is a different race in the Star Trek universe, and the goal is to either win with a military victory by capturing a number of opponent homeworlds, or a cultural victory by building up your civilizations and advancing your culture before your opponents do. This means either players are going to work up to build their forces and seek out civilizations so they can kind of make a bit of a friendship but get ready to start conquering, or you're just going to hide in the corner, turtling a bit, trying not to encounter with anyone, and just build up a culture before anyone notices what you're doing and comes over to see you. You can often get a lot of cooperation for some time. It just breaks down later into some backstabbing and just outright raw as soon as anyone pulls ahead, or you can see someone's got a good chance to get into the lead. Like a civilization game, this starts off slow, and later in the game, players take longer developing their positions each turn and exploring the local areas while trying to decide how peaceful or conquering they want to be. And with no strategies to offer a quick, unnoticed rush to victory, you're either trying to win the game or trying to stop someone who looks like they are, and defeats in a combat can blow a major setback. The base game states it's for 3 players and takes around an hour per player. That seems about right for what I've done so far. I'm assuming, like most games, it's for players who know the rules, and with newer players it will take longer to play. So perhaps any of my future plays may be a bit shorter, depending on if the players know how to play and what expansions we use, and so forth.
Number 2, we've got Keyforge, 9 plays for 6 hours and 44 minutes.
For Keyforge, the time was based off individual 1v1 single matches. No tournament or best of 3 or swapping decks or bidding chains, anything like that. So it was just 9 1v1 matches. For a 2-player PvP card game, this takes longer than other similar games in the TCG and the CCG format I've found. One reason could be that almost every game's involved either playing a new player or playing against someone with a new deck. So it's given either learning time for the game mechanics or just how the decks can combo themselves, so not playing as efficiently because they don't know what cards work with what. And also another bit of the time factor could be that these are obviously pre-constructed decks, you've not made it yourself. So normally a player could have some fast win strategies, whereas if you've got a slow building deck, you've got no choice but to use the slow building deck as a slow building deck. Games have all ranged between half an hour to an hour. I would estimate normally is mostly close, so to the 30-minute mark, and the learning factor several times have just put this up a bit longer in the plays. And that's why it's number 2 on the list, but nowhere near the number 1.
Yeah, so moving on from that, time for the number 1 game, and it's going to be another one I talked about in the last video, and this is Lord of the Rings deck building game, Return of the King version by Cryptozoic.
This here tops the list, and at 9 hours and 2 minutes, it's got a good couple of hours to spare over every other game. It is 7 plays, so some of the other games could easily catch up with more plays, but they didn't. It's here. This is just the one that got played in lockdown. I know it is the top game, and I won't spend too much time recapping points I've already covered, but I probably will ramble on about a couple of bits here and there. So the gameplay time does depend entirely on what mode you're playing the game and how you're playing. So you've got the regular normal game mode, and that's going to keep going until either someone takes out the final arch enemy, the final boss, or until you run out of your deck of cards. The last boss is tough if you're not prepared. So the very first game we played was the longest. As we got to the final round, and we hadn't done an objective with the ring, so the boss actually had an extra 10 like defeat points. I can't quite remember what it's called. And it went on and on and on and on and on to the point where we could have almost run out of the main deck until one of us got lucky enough to get the amount of points needed to defeat him. But otherwise, I've never run out of the main deck. It's mostly just been by defeating the boss. It does have another mode though, called Impossible Mode. Not only in this, all the bosses harder and much more destructive towards the players, but I'm fairly certain from what I've seen from a card or two that it's actually got some player elimination in there as well. You know, it is going to speed up the game quite significantly if you've got less players. Although I feel like it is only at the very end. But the way it all works as well, I find that the Impossible Mode is more of a cooperative than competitive, which may or may not change how the game plays, which may be another factor to add. And I think playing Impossible would be a much longer play mode, to be perfectly honest. Overall though, this takes just shy of an hour and 20 minutes to play on average. And it is just repeated plays of what cemented it at number 1 over lockdown. But I do find it a very enjoyable game in the Cryptozoic line of deck builders, and deserving to be top of the list for the entertainment it's provided me.
And there we have the top 10 time spent over lockdown on games.
And there we have it. That's the games I spent the most time playing over the course of lockdown. Thankfully, this list isn't the videos I spent the most time making, because this would be number 1 on that, with about 8 months since I've done all this recording to get it out. But hopefully now I can get a few of these out of the way and just clear my backlog. Like for instance, I want to do another one for this, but for all time, because there's a lot that should be on this list, and there's some of this list that should be higher up. Just because they didn't get the plays in over lockdown is why they're not there. The next up's going to be the next video, which is going to be top 2021 games I played in lockdown. And that's another one that's going to have to be redone, because since lockdown I actually got out and about, I've actually played a lot better games. But that will follow anyway. So there'll be a link around when the video's up. So thanks for watching. I hope to catch you soon.